Alright, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about how to do a little bit of forensics to see if your device has been infected by this new strain of UEFI malware called BLACKLOTUS. Now this is part 2 of a 2-part video series. The first part released on Monday. That talked about the secure boot updates that are coming out that are supposed to mitigate this in the first place. Now, just a fair warning on that, that is for the initial strain of BLACKLOTUS. It was released into the public just last week. So before people would have to go to a hacking forum and pay, I think it was in the range of like $300 to $5,000 to get this software, and now it's just out there for everyone. So every single script kiddie and goofball is going to be able to go make their own strain of this stuff. It's probably going to get even more advanced. This is already an extremely advanced piece of malware. And so just because of the update on Monday doesn't mean that your system will be secure from this stuff 6 months from now when people have had a chance to play around with this and engineer it further. So we're going to take a look at a few articles. I'm going to drop a link to the 2 resources down below that are guides on mitigating this stuff. The issue with these guides is they were intended for like enterprise and business users and government agencies where you have a security team of people working in IT that can go and do all this stuff. I'm boiling it down to make it easy for the home user to see if their machine has been infected, and then we'll cover some other points after that. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to do a deep dive. First off, I'm just going to go through a couple articles real quick, and then we will get to doing the forensics part. So ESET did a really good write-up here talking about the boot kit. Now this was written a few months ago. Just to be fair, BLACKLOTUS has been around since about October 2022. Like I said though, it did just get released into the wild here recently. So they did a very good write-up. There's a ton of information if you really want to read into this stuff. A couple of significant things to note here. It's capable of running on the latest fully patched Windows 11 systems with UEFI Secure Boot enabled. It's been using a vulnerability that's been around for a while now. Microsoft, I mentioned in that video, Microsoft pushed out that update. So once that update is applied and that revocation of the certificate has happened, this current strain should no longer work. And Windows Defender also does have updated signatures now that should catch this stuff in the event that someone does try and do like a drive-by download on your computer. And the other thing is it does have an HTTP downloader. So, you know, it's the kind of thing that potentially if you're running, maybe a firewall would catch it. It probably wouldn't, but if, let's say you have CrowdSec installed and you've got a bouncer set up, it hopefully should catch this. But I haven't seen anything from CrowdSec on this yet. So I don't know if they are working on being able to keep this thing from phoning home. Now, the other thing that I want to mention here, I've seen this in some articles talking about how if this gets a hold of your machine, that you will need to reinstall your UEFI firmware. Basically, you need to reflash your BIOS. I'm going to cover some stuff here because there's some guidance that came out from both the NSA and Microsoft. So we're going to talk about this section right here. So let's go ahead and get started. So Microsoft released this article. Like I said, I'm condensing it down to the stuff that applies for home users. This was mostly written for an enterprise user. So some things are a little bit different for home users that I'll just keep it simple so you can understand this a little better. Now, the first thing that it talks about is finding files that were put into your EFI drive. This is your operating system partition. This is hidden by default. If you go to Windows Explorer, you know, you might see like your C drive or D drive or whatever, but you won't see this because this is a hidden drive. This is what Windows has, like kernel files and all that shit written onto. So this first method here, they talk about how to see what you're looking for here, and I'll show you in just a second. I've got command prompt pulled up here. We'll take a look at this in a second. What you're looking for is a couple different things here. So you're looking to see if the Modification time looks different. So you can see these two files here are different than these three files here. One of the things that I've noticed when I was doing this stuff, grub64, this is something else I want to mention real quick. This will probably affect Linux users in the near future. So if you are a Linux user, just keep in mind this malware is probably going to be coming for your system. The NSA wrote this in their release, in their guidance on how to mitigate this stuff, that Linux is probably going to be affected by this stuff somewhere in the near future because the grub bootloader was written in here. So you should not see the grub bootloader on Windows. You know, if you're just running Windows on your computer, this file shouldn't even be in there. This is the first step that we're going to use to look and see if this system here has been infected. Which, by the way, it hasn't. I will probably set up some sort of a lab here in the near future with some computers and like a separate network. But at this point, and I also didn't want to infect any of my machines with this malware. This is some pretty nasty stuff. So to start off, you need to open up command prompt as an administrator. So you can come down here, type in command prompt, right click on it, run it as administrator, do cd a couple of times, go to this. First off, you're gonna start with this here. Now the drive letter that you want to pick something that's not already assigned. So, you know, if you only have a C drive, then you could do like mount vol, you could do like D drive or E drive or whatever. I have F. This is the command you're going to want to run here. Mount vol F drive /S. Next thing you're going to want to do is paste this code in here. Now, if you, let's say, mounted this to E drive, if that was a free drive letter, then you'd obviously change this to E. But this is what we're going to do. We're going to put this code in here. You run that snippet, that command in the command prompt, you'll be greeted with all of this stuff here. What we're looking for in particular is a few different files. So if you look back at the article here, what you should see is winload, boot mgfw, and bootmanager.efi. Like I said, in this case, if you're just running Windows on your system, I see no reason that you should even have this grub64 file running in your computer. Like I said, grub bootloader is part of Linux, and we'll get to the NSA article here in just a second. So I ran that command. I've got boot mgfw and boot manager. You'll notice I don't have winload on here. That's just because this system's a little bit different. Now to compare it, what you also need to do here is compare it. So you need to go to your C drive, go to Windows, go to the boot folder, and then open up EFI. And what you're looking for is, again, these two files. So these two files are in your C drive. These two files are in your hidden operating system partition. You're looking for your irregularities here. So you can see here, these files were last modified on 6/19/23 at 6:01 p.m. So these are the same thing. And as you can see here, these are also the same. Now, what was mentioned in the article here, as you can see, like with these extra files here, you know, if you had like a grub64 in this boot mgfw, if these were at different times, then let's say, you know, your boot mgfw is different than your boot manager. These two times are different as far as the modification dates. That could potentially be an issue. It doesn't 100% mean that you've been infected with this stuff, but it does mean that something odd could be going on. The next thing that it mentions is a staging directory presence. It says during the installation process, Black Lotus creates a custom directory under ESP. That's your hidden folder here, System32. Though the files within are deleted following successful installation, the directory itself is not deleted. Again, I'm going to caveat this with this is the current strain. People that are modifying this may change this in the future. Additionally, forensic analysis of the ESP may reveal the historical presence of the files previously contained in this directory. All right, one of the next steps that you can take to see if you've potentially been infected, this doesn't apply to a lot of home users. It would apply to someone like me because I harden the shit out of my Windows install. But there is a chance that maybe you don't even have this stuff turned on. But if you do remember turning this on for your computer, you could go into your registry and look and see if this was set to being disabled. Again, this doesn't mean anything by itself because maybe you don't even have it turned on for your computer, but if you do, it's just something to take a look at. All right, next thing, Event Viewer. Go down to your search bar and type in Event Viewer. This is an app. We're going to look for some different event IDs in here to see if there was an infection on the system. So to get here, you're going to go to Applications and Service Logs, Microsoft, and then Windows Defender. Now, when you click on the operational part here, we're going to need to look for a couple of different event IDs to see if these are present in your system. The first one that we're going to be taking a look for, you need to go to Filter Current Log, go to Event IDs and type in 3002. Now you can see there's 0 logs listed for this one. So we'll go ahead and look for 7032. And there's 0 events listed for this one. So that if you don't see these, that's a good sign. If you do see them, I did see them on one of my systems. What you need to do is read further into what's going on with these. So going back to the Windows article here, what you'd want to look for with the 3002 is specifically the reason, and that, okay, it's stopped because of some reason, and then it's going to give you an error code. Now mine was 043C, which was a completely different reason than this one. I looked up this error code to see what they had specifically listed for it, and that was, it mentioned something about the system drive having some corrupted files. If you do see this, that's going to be a pretty bad sign. The other thing that you want to take a look at is that error, the error 7023, or that event. And if you do see that, that could also be a pretty good sign that you have an issue there. The next thing that you'll want to take a look at if you're a home user, hopefully you're running some sort of network logging. I've talked in previous videos. You could go back and watch a video on Portmaster. That's a really good one. If you're running OpenSense or some sort of router that has network logging, but you need to have some sort of network logging enabled to see what's going in and out of your computer. And so the thing that you'll be looking for, and by the way, I mentioned this, if let's say you have SimpleWall installed, for example, or you have Portmaster, and you see winlogon.exe trying to catch internet traffic. Let's say you open up, let's say you have Portmaster installed and you open up and see that winlogon.exe is passing some internet traffic. That's going to be a huge red flag. And I would say at that point, you know, let's say you already have found like the grub 64, you've seen mismatched files inside of your boot drive, and then you, that alone, I would say that's probably the biggest red flag to look for. But also if you see this requesting internet connections, and I can tell you guys, I've been running Windows for years now, I have never seen winlogon.exe ever ask for internet access. If you see this, that's going to be a huge red flag. One of the things that they did mention is they were able to catch this here specifically by using Sysmon, System Monitor. This is part of like an administrative tool suite that Microsoft has. I'll drop a link down below if you want to download it. It might be something just handy to have on your computer, learn how it works and see what's going on. Or, you know, like I said, just use something like SimpleWall or OpenSense or something like that that already monitors traffic. And, you know, the other thing that I would suggest, I'm going to make a video on it, have some sort of an intrusion prevention system. So you could use OpenSense for that, or you could use CrowdSec. CrowdSec is really good. I'll have a video coming up on setting that up for Windows here in the near future. I'll also have something coming up for setting up an OpenSense router with CrowdSec configured on that. Now they go into some more stuff. You could come and take a look at this stuff if you want to, if you're a home user. The methods that I mentioned here are what you're really going to be wanting to pay attention to. Now we're going to take a look at one other thing because we need to cover some important information. There's probably some questions you guys have about this kind of malware, and fortunately the NSA was able to cover some of this stuff, so we're going to get into that real quick. NSA also had their own series of steps to mitigate this kind of stuff, and like I said, they tailored it towards enterprise users. This stuff was not user friendly for people that have Windows installed on their home computer. One of the things they mentioned here, shim and grub are in its implantation routine. Linux administrators should also be vigilant for variants affecting popular Linux distributions. That part 1 video that I dropped on Monday on Secure Boot talked about how Microsoft is working with major Linux distros to get the Secure Boot updates pushed out that should mitigate this garbage. But that is something to be aware of, that Linux users are probably going to be affected by this stuff at some point. Now this talks about going and doing some stuff. We've already talked about this, like I said. If you really want to have a good, solid, secure computer, harden the shit out of Defender. You need to have hypervisor turned on inside of your BIOS. That way you can turn on things like code integrity. I'll cover some more of that stuff in a later video because that kind of starts getting into some really advanced stuff. This is what I was talking about with customized UEFI Secure Boot. Not really user-friendly. Now, we're gonna go through some of the questions that they put in here that they answered. So one of the top question is Black Lotus a firmware implant? Now this article here mentions that, if you get infected, that you're gonna have to reinstall your UEFI firmware, basically meaning you're gonna have to reflash your BIOS. Now, fortunately, BIOS viruses are super, super rare. Basically, the way they work is for it to work is it has to be written for each specific motherboard, like the manufacturer, the hardware. So, if you have like an Intel chipset, it's going to be different than a BIOS virus that has to be written for an AMD chipset. But BIOS viruses do exist, and those are super nasty. That's the kind of thing, if you ever get infected with one of those, your motherboard is fucked and you're going to have to throw it out, basically. That's the kind of thing you wouldn't even want to chance reinstalling the BIOS to see if it'd work. Now, fortunately, Black Lotus is not BIOS malware. If you are infected with this stuff, you don't have to throw out your motherboard or reflash your BIOS. What you do have to do is all your data is gone. You cannot remove this stuff once it's installed. I know there's some people that try and remove this stuff. The way this malware is written is this is in there permanently. Once you've been infected with this stuff, you have to wipe everything. You've got to wipe that bootloader. You got to wipe the hidden EFI drive. You have to wipe Windows. Everything has to go because it's all infected and you cannot get rid of it. Now these guys talk about can you remove or quarantine this stuff? It says prior to execution. So in that Microsoft article here, it mentioned that it creates a staging presence. Once it phones home to its command and control center, which is presumably basically, I would imagine, right after the files get set up on that hidden drive, that once it does that, you can't remove it. But I would say even if you do find these files and it hasn't executed, it hasn't called home to its command and control center, I would say, again, go ahead and wipe the whole thing out, start over. That would be my suggestion. I know there's some people who like to try and mitigate this stuff. This stuff is really tricky, and I wouldn't recommend trying to work around having a version of Windows that was infected by this stuff. Next thing, which versions of Windows are affected? Basically all the versions. I've talked in previous videos, if you're running Windows 7 or Windows 8, that's just ridiculous. You need to update to modern shit. Putting this stuff aside, if you go look at all of the CVEs that get patched by Microsoft every week, you're going to end up dealing with getting your system infected. The people that run Windows 7, if you're that kind of person, I guess I don't even know why you'd be watching this video. But it's stupid to do that because if it has internet access, it's going to get infected at some point. There's so many critical vulnerabilities that people can just work past. Next thing is Linux affected, and is there a version of Black Lotus that targets Linux? They said nothing's been identified at this time, but like I said, with it being written for a grub bootloader, the other thing they're probably going to go for, or at least now that it's released in the wild and anybody can go and modify, we're probably going to see variants affecting Linux here pretty soon. This kind of thing could be a big payoff if someone writes it and they infect a big server farm, they infect a corporation with this stuff, they're able to siphon a bunch of data out. Other than that, the rest of this stuff doesn't really apply all that much to home users. So that covers all the big points. If you still have any questions on this stuff, you know, if you are having issues with trying to find if any of your EFI files were infected or anything like that, drop a comment down below. Let me know if you got a question. If not, hopefully this explained everything pretty clearly. And with all that being said, I will see you in the next video.